calling us to be voices of truth and to live our lives with courageous love. If we want the world to be different, we need to answer God's call to be different in the world. Gandhi called it being the change. We must become the voices of truth that call out lies. We must become the proclaimers of promises in the midst of despair. We must be change makers in the face of injustice. We have to become modern day prophets. I know that sounds like a lot. That word, prophet, feels heavy. Just saying it out loud feels like a heavy ask from me. And I get that you might be disinclined to think of yourself in those terms as prophetic material. Me? People have been resisting, if not outright running from that call since the very beginning. And that's why we're looking at the life of Moses, because Moses is an example of how God can use reluctant and unsuspecting people to do some pretty amazing things. If you thought Moses, you know, we create these images of who we think somebody is, and if you've ever thought that Moses was some flawless prophetic, you know, the model of flawless prophetic practice, you may want to check your Bibles again. You're probably missing some pages. There's a lot to his story. It's not all good. I'm going to do a little recap, get you up to speed from last week. If you want the full replay, the full version, you can go to Facebook or YouTube. But here's the summary. Last week's lesson from Moses' life was about facing our problems. We will never make a meaningful difference in our world until we are willing to face our problems. Now, I accept that we sometimes need to look away for a while in the face of certain unbearable traumas. Sometimes we need to turn away in order to keep breathing, in order to keep moving, to survive the immediacy and the intensity of certain harms. But we can't look away forever. It is when we turn and face our problems, when we turn and face the problems of our world, when we face the tragedies and the injustices, when we face the phobias and the isms, it's when we look at the places and the people who are in need, it's then that we align ourselves with God, because you better believe that's where God is looking. That's where we started last week. Step one, we have to face our problems. So with this week, we shift our attention to finding our purpose. Moving from chapter 2 to chapter 3 today, we turn the page on Moses' life from the tragic to the absurd. When last we saw him, he had fled Egypt after killing someone and was in the land of Midian. He's trying to make a life for himself. He finds a wife, Zipporah, seems like a nice gal. They have the kid together. He names his son Gershom, which sounds like the Hebrew word for a foreigner there. You talk about making your problems somebody else's problems. He literally names his child after his own lamentation. I'm a stranger in a foreign land. Way to start a kid off with some baggage, right? Hey, what's your name? Gershom. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, it means foreigner. What are you named after? My dad's insecurities. He's a man trying to figure out where he belongs in the world, Moses. One day while he's out tending his flock, he sees a bush that's on fire, but it's not consumed by the fire. The Old Testament scholar Dennis Olson calls it the unquenchable burning bush. It's quite an attention grabber by God. No one walks by an unquenchable burning bush, not even someone as practiced at turning away as Moses. And so he approaches the bush with what I would imagine is a hesitant pace. And then he hears God speak to him. God instructs him to take his shoes off, and he declares that the ground on which he stands is holy ground. Holy ground is sacred space, not physical space necessarily. It's less about geography and it's more about a tangible experience of God's real presence. It's when you just know that you're close to God. It's simultaneously existing in a state of inexplicable transcendence, recognizing something bigger than you is happening, and at the same time, a sense of utter belonging, that you are right where you're meant to be. All his life, it seems like Moses is never quite where he's meant to be. He's plagued by this gnawing sense that he didn't belong wherever he was. And you know what? It's hard to be in touch with your purpose, to know why you are somewhere when you don't even trust that you are where you're supposed to be. But this is the moment. Standing in the warmth of that unquenchable burning bush on holy ground in a place of utter acceptance and belonging, this is the moment that Moses begins the journey of finding his purpose. I say begins the journey because it is a process. This is not an instant transformation. This is something that takes time for all of us. Even as he stands there in the presence of a miracle, hearing the voice of God, he responds with skepticism and reluctance. In fact, he comes up with no fewer than 4 objections. We're just going to look at 2 today. In verse 11, Moses says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" That's the first objection. Who am I? You could paraphrase this as, God, clearly you've got the wrong person. I think we all have some picture in our minds about the kind of person we imagine God using for God's purposes. When I was in college, I was taking religious study courses, and people would say to me, "Oh, you're going to be a pastor." And I'd say, "No way." I don't know what I thought I was going to do with a religious studies degree, but I had a picture in my mind of what a pastor looked like, and it was not me. The picture Moses has in his mind for the kind of person God would call is clearly not him. And to be fair, many of us looking at Moses' life from the outside, we might agree. His general demeanor and temperament do, in many ways, seem ill-suited to the task of a prophet. And at the same time, his life, chaotic and tumultuous and painful though it has been, objectively makes him qualified to be the one who is sent. How many other people can say that they were born a Hebrew but raised as Egyptian royalty? I'm fairly certain he's the only one. You might argue he is the most qualified person who has ever existed to answer this call. But this is what we do. We look at our life, our struggles, our frailties, our failings. We look at all that didn't go the way we hoped it would or imagined that it was supposed to, and we see deficiencies and shortcomings. And we imagine that these traumas are insurmountable obstacles that eliminate us from being the solution to any problem. And we allow them to become the enemy of our purpose. I can't possibly, because. God, you can't possibly use me, because. The reality is quite different. In the hospital, I meet people every day who are immersed in deep suffering, battling broken bodies, minds, hearts, and souls. And yes, the intense heat of heartache, it can be hard to see life beyond that. But I see an amazing thing very often happen. Suffering becomes the well of our empathy. Those who survive suffering discover meaning in it and learn to care in a profound way. They learn to care in an engaged way, a way that wants to make a difference for others who suffer. The struggles of our lives, they may diminish us for a time. They may wear us down. They may threaten to undo us, but after that, if we press forward in faith, they empower us to live with a compassionate resolve to make a difference for someone else because we've been where they've been. Moses can't see it yet, but he's been where they've been. He doesn't realize that the very things he has suffered through is the reason that God thinks he's the right person for the job. And so, in the absence of Moses being able to really grasp what God is trying to accomplish here, God responds, "All right, Moses, I get it." And so he offers him an assurance. You know what, Moses? I'll be with you. Whatever happens, wherever you go, I'll be with you. It's the promise of God's abiding presence. It's a pretty good rebuttal, but it also leads right into Moses' next challenge, his next objection. Because Moses then turns his argument to, well, who are you? You know, when God doesn't buy the whole, who am I to be doing this argument, Moses shifts gears to, and who are you that anyone's going to believe any of this? God offers a stunningly simple answer. And at the same time, one that's exceedingly profound. He gives Moses a name, the name of God. Christian scholars call it the tetragrammaton, because we like to make little things into big things. 4 Hebrew consonants, Yod, He, Vav, He. It's commonly pronounced Yahweh in Christian theology, though most Jews will never say the word. They won't speak the name of God out of reverence. They hold that the original pronunciation has been lost to history. In fact, I have a rabbi friend who likes to tease me about how we Christians throw around the word Yahweh. He likes to say, I don't know how it is pronounced, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. The literal translation of this name is, I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. It's just 4 letters. And in 4 letters, God declares their essence and their purpose. It's the kind of maddeningly broad answer only a transcendent God can give. God refuses to be boxed in by anyone's narrow definitions or limited human imaginations. You want to know who I am, Moses? You want to know who I am? I am exactly who I am. What God is essentially saying is, Moses, it's not your job to make them understand me. It's not your job to change the world or save my people. Your purpose, your role in all this, Moses, is simply to go and trust that I am. Now, most of us have heard where this all leads. Moses becomes a fierce advocate for the Hebrew people. He risks his safety for them. He cares with a protective fervor for the people, almost to a fault at times. He loses objectivity. He even takes their side against God on occasion. He's all in. He eventually discovers his purpose and he dives into it. He's not there today. He's not there yet. He's not there in today's reading in chapter 3, but the story doesn't end in chapter 3. You may not fully understand today what your purpose is. You may have a hard time contemplating the idea of you being a modern day prophet, or a hard time accepting the notion of discovering a well of compassion and empathy in your suffering. But your story isn't over yet either. There is a purpose that God has for you, because there is a purpose that God has for each and every one of us, because each and every one of us gets to be part of the change that we want to see in this world. More importantly, we get to be part of the change that God has planned for this world. Amazing things begin to happen when we find our purpose. People speak out with a voice that they didn't know they had. Did you know I was voted shyest in my high school? True story. When we find our purpose, we discover courage to try things we never tried before. When we find our purpose, we refuse to be dictated by our fear of failure. We try anyway because it matters too much not to. And when we find our purpose, we discover a resilience to make it through the challenges that a meaningful life is unavoidably going to put in front of us. I see this in the hospital. This resilience that pops up. Researcher George Bonanno, he writes about resilience as something that's a function of a complex, multi-factored equation. It's not easy to tell what makes a person resilient, but he said at least one important component is being connected to your sense of purpose. When you find the thing that matters to you and you hold firm to that thing, you can weather life's storms better. When you find your purpose, you generally live a more abundant kind of life. So with all this in mind, I want to end by sharing one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever heard in my life. It's a sort of guiding nugget of truth which has fundamentally shaped my personal philosophy and belief system. And I didn't read it in the Bible or the Talmud or the Quran or any other sacred text. It didn't come from the United Methodist Book of Discipline. Sorry, Bishop. It's not a catchy song lyric or a quote from a classical writer or philosopher. It's from a quirky and ridiculous TV show called Doctor Who. In a moment of pure chaos, when everything has gone wrong and everything's falling apart, the main character, the doctor, says to the person with him, "Do what I do. Hold on tight and pretend it's a plan." Do what I do. Hold on tight and pretend it's a plan. That may be the best definition of faith I've ever heard. As you journey and discover your purpose, as you discover that thing that you can do in and for this world, maybe even against all logic in your head, hold on tight. It's a pretty good plan. In that purpose, you will find meaning. In that purpose, you're going to learn about love. In that purpose, you're going to develop a resilience to face this world's hardships. But most of all, in that purpose, you will stand on holy ground with the God who was, who is, and who always shall be. Thanks be to God. Amen.